This history video concludes my look at the most interesting presidential transitions in history. If you missed any of them, one of them was on the most ill-mannered one, which was Harry Truman to Dwight Eisenhower. The most controversial one, which was Herbert Hoover to Franklin Roosevelt. The one that was most laden with charges of partisanship, the Adams transition to Jefferson. And I'd like to talk today about the 1876 presidential transition. The Democratic candidate was Samuel J. Tilden, the governor of New York. The Republican candidate was Rutherford B. Hayes, the governor of Indiana. And the campaign featured a lot of charges and countercharges. But the Republicans were in trouble in the election because, first of all, Hayes was just a compromise candidate. Grant had been expected to run for another term. There was an economic downturn in the country that they blamed on the Republicans, and there were a lot of scandals in the Grant administration that also didn't help the Republican Party. So the normal Republican margin of victory that people had come to expect after the Civil War just wasn't there. In the popular vote, it's clear that Tilden defeated Hayes in the popular vote, but the electoral vote was another story. When the electoral votes were filed, Tilden led Hayes by 19 votes in the Electoral College, but 20 votes were undecided and could not be awarded because there were strong allegations of voter fraud, of carpetbagging, of intimidation in 3 southern states that had been part of the Confederacy: Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. Some of the grossest shenanigans that impacted the election were that there were so many illiterate voters because blacks were being allowed to vote for the first time in many of these southern states. And parties, in addition to their name, could put a symbol if they wished. And in some of these southern states, the Democratic Party put Abraham Lincoln's picture and name on the ballot as their symbol, even though Lincoln obviously would have been for the Republican candidate. And that misled thousands and thousands of black voters. And there were all kinds of irregularities in the counting and who could be an elector and all of that. And it was almost unresolvable because both sides were so guilty. Most modern analysts believe that Tilden won the popular vote, but that Hayes should have won the electoral vote. In any case, the government decided, the federal government passed a law setting up an electoral commission to review the results of the election. And there were 15 members of the commission, half from the Senate, half from the House. The Democrats controlled one, the Republicans the other. So those 10 votes split equally. And 5 remaining members from the U.S. Supreme Court. There was 1 independent on the court, and he was supposed to be the swing vote with 2 Democratic and 2 Republican judges going the other ways. But he left the court in the middle of the deliberations to take a Senate seat in Illinois. And the result was that the judge who was appointed to take his place was a Republican, because the only other remaining judges on the court were Republican. The Democrats saw the handwriting on the wall and approached the Republicans to cut a deal. And a deal was cut, which was one of the most horrific deals in our history. The Democrats said, "We'll let you have Hayes as president. We'll let you count all those electoral votes for Hayes. We'll defeat Tilden, but in return, we want you to withdraw all federal troops from the South." The South had been under federal troop occupation since the Civil War, particularly in 2 states, Louisiana and South Carolina, which were 2 of the 3 states that were called into question. Well, the reason the Democrats wanted the troops out of there is they wanted to give control of the South, of these states, to the Ku Klux Klan, the white terrorist organization that had been launched in the 1870s to terrorize the black community and to keep them away from the polls, intimidate them against running for office, and assert a political domination on behalf of the white residents of those states. The Ku Klux Klanners would go around in sheets, white sheets, and burn crosses. They were supposed to be the ghosts of the dead Confederate soldiers who had come back to haunt the black populations of the South. And it was a grisly situation with hundreds, if not thousands, of lynchings every year, and a reign of terror that inundated the South. And the only thing that was stopping it from taking over were the federal troops who were protecting the civil rights of the black populations. Well, when Hayes withdrew them from the South, the Klan moved right in and took over. They ousted the Republican governors, they put in Democratic racist governors, and most of the segregation laws date from the 1870s, the mid-1870s. In the 60s and throughout the early 1870s, there was real integration and real racial progress going on in the South. But once Hayes pulled the troops out, it came to an end, typified by the Supreme Court case of Plessy v. Ferguson that was decided in 1877, as I recall, that held that separate but equal was okay in schools and in public facilities. And that laid the basis for segregation as the policy of the South for the next 100 years or 80 years until Brown v. Board of Education overturned it. And all of that racism, all of that pain, dated not from the Civil War. The healing had gone on after the Civil War. Blacks were getting land. They were being integrated into society. The Freedmen's Bureau was helping them. But then when Hayes pulled the troops out, it stopped on a dime, and the racist, vicious Southern Democrats took over and ran the South with an iron hand for the next 80 years.